Welcome. You're in the Albemarle County Courthouse, still a functioning courthouse. It is the second courthouse in the city of Charlottesville, having been built in 1803, at least a portion of the building you're in now. These walls have seen the presence of three of our founding fathers, three presidents, James Madison, James Roe, and of course Thomas Jefferson. So a lot of history has been made here over the years, including the trial which you're about to hear. This is probably the last day of the trial of Francis Morgan, who is accused of killing John Coles near the town of Warren in Albemarle County. It is November 1889, and Mr. Morgan has been held for the last 3 months in the Albemarle County Jail. Order in the court. Mr. Woods, do you have any further witnesses, sir?
Just one more, Your Honor. The Commonwealth calls Sheriff Brenner to the stand.
Sheriff, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Sheriff, please tell us about the events of the past August concerning the accused.
A lad had come to my office with the news that a Mr. John S. Coles had been shot with a pistol fired by an Englishman or Irishman named Mr. Morgan, and that he had been seen riding in the direction of North Garden.
And what action did you take?
I immediately formed a posse and went in pursuit of the suspect.
And did you apprehend him?
Yes, we did. And when we found him, he was in the company of a Dr. Waller.
Are you aware of any animosity between Mr. Morgan and Mr. Coles?
Objection, Your Honor. That would be hearsay.
I will allow it.
It was common knowledge that the two had argued often. Mr. Coles had forbidden Mr. Morgan to pass through his farm, to which Mr. Morgan apparently paid no heed.
No further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Duke, would you like to cross-examine?
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Sheriff, did my client attempt in any way to flee when you and your men encountered him on the road?
No, sir, he did not.
And how did he explain the presence of Dr. Waller?
He said he had gone riding to fetch medical attention for Mr. Coles.
I see. Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. The witness may step down.
Commonwealth rests.
Do you have any witnesses, Mr. Duke?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Mrs. Joan Alexander to the stand.
Mrs. Alexander, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Now, Mrs. Alexander, I understand that you own a farm about a mile from the coal farm, and that the two farms are separated by the village of Warren. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct.
I see. And how is it that you know Mr. Morgan?
Well, Francis, you know, well, I guess he's Mr. Morgan to you, but he boards at our farm, and he's been boarding with us about 3 years. You see, my husband and I are teaching him to farm.
I see. And were you riding with him on the morning in question?
Well, on that morning, I had some errands I had to do in Scottsville, and Mr. Morgan said he'd be pleased to ride with me.
And what transpired during this ride?
Well, we decided to take a shortcut, and very soon thereafter, we heard a horse coming up behind us. It was Mr. Coles.
And what happened next?
Well, he said that he didn't want us trespassing on his land, and things escalated from there.
So, what happened after he rode up?
Well, let me just tell you what happened then. He said, Mr. Morgan said, I didn't know this was your property. And Mr. Coles said, you're a damn liar and a scoundrel. And Mr. Morgan said, you, sir, are the scoundrel. And Mr. Coles pulled out his riding crop, and Mr. Morgan hopped down from his horse and grabbed that riding crop and hit Mr. Coles about the legs.
Sounds like tempers are really beginning to flare. What happened next?
Well, Mr. Coles then pulled out his pistol and fired it at Mr. Morgan. And then Mr. Morgan pulled out his pistol and fired it at Mr. Coles, and Mr. Coles hit the ground.
I see. Sorry. No further questions, Your Honor.
Do you wish to cross, Mr. Woods?
Yes, thank you, Joan. Mrs. Alexander, are you aware that Mr. Coles had warned Mr. Morgan about not cutting across his property?
No, sir.
Well, had you been aware of this, would you have chosen another route?
Well, considering what happened that afternoon, absolutely, we'd have gone a different way.
Thank you. Nothing further, Your Honor.
The witness may step down with the thanks of this court. Any further witnesses, Mr. Duke?
Just one more, Your Honor. This time, the defense calls Francis Morgan to the stand.
Mr. Morgan, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may be seated, sir.
Now, Mr. Morgan, would you describe in your own words your recollection of this tragedy?
I arose on the morning of August 24th and had breakfast with the Alexander family. I had offered to accompany Mrs. Alexander on her trip to Scottsville, so I put on my riding clothes and put my pistol in my pocket with the hilt exposed, which is my usual way of carrying it.
I see. And what happened during this ride?
We had passed through a gate on the Coles property and had gone some distance when we heard a horse approaching from behind.
Now, who was it who rode up on you?
Well, it was Mr. Coles, and he said he was restricting all access to his property because someone had left the gate open and a sow and a few of his pigs had escaped.
I see. Well, why didn't you just ride on and promise not to use that pathway again?
Well, at that point, he called me a damn scoundrel, and he rode his horse directly at me. I quickly dismounted and grabbed the riding crop from him, but he pulled his gun, took deliberate aim at me, and fired.
And how is it that you're not wounded?
Well, I was. The ball grazed me on the left side of the neck, and smoke blinded me for a few moments. I pulled my gun, and without aiming, I fired. When I saw him lying on the ground, I rode off to find the doctor.
Prudent action. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Do you wish to cross, Mr. Woods?
Your companion, Ms. Alexander, has testified that you soundly beat Mr. Coles with his riding crop. Why did you leave that out of your story?
She said I hit him on the legs, but honestly, I have no memory of that.
Ah, a convenient lapse.
Objection, Your Honor.
Move on, Mr. Woods.
So, Mr. Coles took deliberate aim, but missed you. And you, who did not aim, killed a man. Are we to believe that you are just lucky?
Well, sir, we were at very close range. An inch or so to the right, and Mr. Cole's shot would probably have killed me.
We have discovered that you rode some 20 miles following the shooting. Weren't you just trying to escape?
No, sir. The sheriff found me with Dr. Waller.
Whom you just happened to meet along the road.
Mrs. Waller will tell you that I came to their residence and she sent me off in the direction the doctor was riding.
Finally, Mr. Morgan, are you seeing the Alexanders' daughter?
What if I am?
Well, it might make Mrs. Alexander want to paint you in a favorable light.
Captain Woods, this court respects you and your valuable service. However, Mrs. Alexander is also an upstanding citizen. Do you have any further questions of this witness? The witness may step down. This has been a long trial, and we've heard a lot of testimony. I don't believe the jury needs any long summations on the ground we have already covered. You're up first, Mr. Woods.
I'll be brief. The defendant, on several occasions, had exchanged words with the deceased, and about the very issue of his cutting through his property. His pistol ball struck Mr. Coles above the left eye, killing him instantly. It is altogether likely that he brought along his weapon for this very purpose. I ask you, please find him guilty.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Duke, your turn.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen, I also do not need to make a long speech. My client fired his pistol after being fired upon. Clearly a case of self-defense. He promised the sheriff that he had written off for help and would turn himself in as soon as he had procured a physician. And why should he fear the law? He had committed no crime. I trust you will see it the same way, and because you see it that way, you will find him innocent. Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you, gentlemen. The jury may now retire to consider the verdict. Has the jury reached a verdict? Please come forth to the bench.
How do you open? You go through there, buddy. Push it.
Should be good.
What is it for anything? Oh.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. All right, the jury has spoken. Mr. Morgan, would you please rise? Mr. Morgan, you are found guilty of shooting Mr. Coles and are hereby sentenced to 18 months in the state penitentiary in Richmond. This case is dismissed. You may now clear the courtroom.
Is this for real life? For real life?
I guess.
That was it. That's how a trial goes.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. He's guilty. Wow.
I'm not sure.
He's the real one.